Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of CPOV Autographs. Before we get into this brand new episode, I just want to mention that I am going to be at PAX Unplugged in Philly. It's the first weekend of December, and if you're going, you should look out for me. I would love for y'all to say hi. I'm going to be there with my incredible co-host from Fun and Games, Jeff Moonen. We're going to be covering some board game adaptations of video games, as well as just checking out the cool stuff that's there. Please don't hesitate to say hi if you see me, or shoot me a message on Twitter if you're going to be there. I would love to connect. On to this week's episode. I am chatting with the incredible Patrick Klepek. He is someone I've admired for quite some time and a big fan of his work, and I've wanted to have him on the show to chat for a while. I am a loyal and longtime Waypoint listener, Waypoint Plus subscriber, and I've wanted to chat with some of the folks from that show and the site for quite some time. So this is really exciting. I do want to mention, though, at the top that, put on my producer hat for a minute, you will hear my dog jingling and jangling in the background a little bit. I cut it out where I could, but he was pretty active while we were recording, and there wasn't a ton I could do. Also, at some point, I didn't realize till I was editing, you can hear Patrick's incredible daughters screaming in the background briefly at 2 moments. I tried to edit it out, but I couldn't get it out. Neither of us noticed during recording, but it's funny to me now, and I just wanted to give you a heads up that you're not hallucinating. You may at some point hear a little bit of faint screaming in the background, and yeah, so that's there. It's what we do. You know, it's what happens when you're podcasting live, except this isn't live. Anyway, I'm rambling now, so I'm just going to kick it to the episode. Thank you so much for being here, and enjoy this incredible chat I had with the brilliant, talented, and charming Patrick Klepek. If you hear chaotic kerfuffle in the background, I have a dog, Otis, who's a puppy. He's 8 months old and is chilling for now. But, you know, during the podcast, it's anybody's guess. So.
Usually if I keep the lights off downstairs, the children are too scared to come downstairs. So I that's how I get away with it at nighttime. It's too dark down there. I don't want to go down to Dad's office.
I get it. You know, relatable. Cool. All right. Well, I'm super excited. I am chatting with the prolific and incredible Patrick Klepek today. Patrick, thank you for joining me.
Hey, that was one of the smoothest transitions into the start. I was taken aback. I did not even know we were beginning, and you rolled right into it. I have to take some notes.
I've been doing this for almost 10 years, and so I picked up a thing or two. It's funny, like, I listen to Waypoint constantly. I'm a big fan. I've been in your streams for ages. And so, like, I feel like I know you because you're so anecdotal everywhere. and we've actually met once, but it's so long ago. There is not a planet in which you would remember. It was so brief. It was at the first PAX East ever. I went to one of the G4 meetups, and you and Abby Happy were hanging out outside.
Yeah, I remember those because that was, they were tiered. Like, do you want to stand in line and get an autograph from Adam Sessler or Morgan Webb? I mean, they didn't put me there. No one wanted my autograph. It was like, but then there's the G4 TV meetup that I think like Adam would come through at least to help us wrangle some folks to show up. So I do recall maybe not that specific encounter, but I do remember that era of my life. It was a very strange time. I mean, I liked working at G4 quite a bit, but it was definitely strange.
Yeah, it was one of those things where it was long before I'd started my gaming podcast or had any journalistic integrity, which is very minimal at this point anyway, because I'm mostly indie. But like,
hey, you and me both. So frankly, you do it long enough, you get that blue check mark.
Exactly.
Damn.
Oh no, yeah, no, topical. But yeah, I had befriended Blair Herder, and he was like, "Oh, you should come to this thing." He was like super. I mean, you know how Blair was. He was always excited about everything, and so that's how I met a bunch of folks. And at that time, and that started this snowball of like, maybe I could do this. I don't know, like I could try and fumble my way through any podcasting. But I'm curious with you, like, I mean, so Vice says you've been doing this for 20 years, but I feel like it's longer than that now, right?
Well, I probably wrote that bio 6 years ago.
Right. So we're getting closer to 30 years now.
I guess, yeah. No, it's I think 20 years it might be right. I might have updated it from like 15 to 20. Okay. That might be the case because I sort of like formally started writing when I kind of marketed the first E3 I went to, which is like when you made the transition from like copying and pasting text from EGM to a website on GeoCities. I don't know if that counts as writing necessarily, but when I started working for a handful of sites in which a lot of these folks overlapped at different IRC chat rooms. So it's like SegaNet and Gaming Age, which is was the original Gaming Age forums, which became NeoGAF, and then when someone was accused of sexual misconduct, became spun off into Reset Era. And so like SegaNet, like Gaming Age, like the first E3 I went to, E3 1998, in Atlanta, Georgia, was with Gamers Online with a Z, because that was cool back then. And we might come full circle. The Z's are making
cool
a
comeback.
I feel like maybe I could be on. If this waypoint thing sputters out, then Gamers Online is coming back, and so that's kind of like a first like foot in the door where I remember going up to. I remember the person I was working with, who ran the website, said, "Do you want to go to this E3 thing?" And I remember going up to my parents' bedroom, pitching them on going to this video game conference in Atlanta. And you have to remember I'm, 13 or 14 at the time. And they asked me to leave the room and they would discuss. I think I caught them off guard. It was not really the sort of thing that a young kid is asking me, like, "Hey, I'm been thinking about my career. Want to go to this conference, do some networking." And I'm sure that's not how I phrased it, but it's probably how I came across to them. And, the way my parents have told me their version of that story later was we were inclined to say no, but they were so puzzled by what I had said that, my dad was, started as a salesperson and then kind of moved in sort of an executive role, and basically just contrived a reason to go visit a production plant in Atlanta so that he could go with me to E3. And so the first E3 I went with my dad. Back then they had these underage media badges. They were pink. They made sure that you stood out. But they specifically had ones for like underage media. And then as a result, they gave, a separate pass to my father as sort of as a chaperone, and that was like my real entryway into the door of a video. That E3 is where I met Brad Shoemaker in person for the first time. Discovered that gravelly voice much far before anyone else was able to, through the magic of podcasts and videos online, because that was also sort of overlapped with meeting up with some of the folks I had become friendly with on different IRC channels, and those IRC channels would be so fortuitous, and so much of what I do for a living is like luck, circumstance, and like a dash of talent in like varying degrees of importance. Yeah. And for me, it's like, how did I end up on the very specific websites that also were connected to the very specific IRC channels that just so happened to have editors for EGM in them, and also EGM and EGM2 and what was the night? Was this before GMR and XP Nation? But the other publications they put out at the time happened to be located in Lombard, Illinois, which was 20 minutes from where I lived.
Right.
What the fuck?
How is that possible?
Yeah, that is a set of circumstances that you quite literally cannot make up. But all of that, helped get my foot in the door, like at a early age, where like I was able to take the writing stuff pretty seriously because I actually could foresee a path. I was, IRC channels are not necessarily where you're doing networking, but I just happened to bumble into the one that, had a bunch of people that, John Riccardi, who co-founded 8.4, Mark McDonald, who also co-founded 8.4, that were editors at EGM and helped found 1UP. Those are all like incredibly good friends of mine that also were super important to a number of jobs that I would have, later in life.
Yeah, it's a sad side note. My first E3 ever was the online one. So like,
very cool.
Great.
Just get in the app and network away.
It just was. It was hysterical. But like, it's funny. I get the sense we're around the same age, and you talk about this going to your parents for this first thing. Like, I didn't start going.
I am 22 years old, at least according to most people who.
Of course, most people.
Me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Of course, it's that baby face. Patrick.
I was at a wedding. I was at a wedding this weekend, and the bartender at like one of the pre-wedding events. He was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, man. Can I get your ID?" And I was like, God. "Yeah, look, dude. Like, no, apologize. Like, I am 100% used to this. Like, no offense meant." And he looked at it and goes, "Good for you." I was like, "Thanks."
Love that. But it's like one of those things, like I didn't start going to cons under my own steam and covering stuff and doing media stuff until I was in college and beyond. So like my parents didn't really have a say at that point. I was out on my own doing my own thing. But like I remember the first Comic-Con I wanted to go to, and I've lived in New York my whole life, and this was way after, like, Times Square had been long cleaned up by my time I went to my first New York Comic-Con. My mom went, "You can't go to Comic-Con. It's like, you can't go through Times Square. You know what goes on at Times Square?" I said, "Mom, when's the last time you went to Times Square?" Like, the only thing that's going to happen to me is someone might sell me a tchotchke or, like, a t-shirt.
Don't you know 10,000 tourists die there every week?
And so I can just relate to that confusion because, you know, talking about like now in 2020, saying you have online friends or like, I don't even think that distinction really even exists anymore.
No.
People are just friends. But when we were growing up, it's like, yeah, I play games with these friends online, and like they could be your close friends. You play games with them every day. Your parents would be like, "Yeah, but do you know where they live? What's their last name?"
Oh yeah, my parents were understandable. I mean, frankly,
and it makes sense.
Frankly, looking back, maybe not being good enough parents. Like, hey, you're gonna go meet up with some guy whose online handle. I mean, my dad did not know this. Like, Hot Taste X. Like, that sounds deeply erotic, and also maybe someone who was going to be predatory to my child, which is not the case. Like, it was this guy named John. He was super cool, and I don't know. Like, it's one of those things. And in retrospect, I have more and more respect for as I've gotten older, because the sort of leap of faith that my parents took to, well, screw it, let's just go see where this goes. Like, this is an interesting thing that our kid has asked, and I don't know, let's like see what happens. I mean, certainly when, you know, my dad would meet a bunch of these people, they seemed super reasonable and like nice. I was very lucky also to like, you know, also have met a bunch of people who were super reasonable and nice. And like seemed just normal. But then, you know, coinciding with that, you know, about a year or two later, once I had become, eventually was the site manager for Gaming Age, and I started getting checks in the mail. And so when I started getting $400 to $500 a month at like 15, my parents were like, "Okay, this is far too much money for you. Like, what does a teenager need with this amount of like cash?" And so they just started pilfering my checks, and I would get some fraction of it, and the rest went to college, which was the right move. Like, I didn't need anything more. It like allowed me to, you know, buy the games I wanted, do the things that I wanted to do. You know, but it was also a validation for my parents of like, oh, okay, not only is he like meeting these people, he's also, you know, money is literally, so I was like, oh, we have to go figure out taxes for our 15-year-old. Like, that's odd, because they were they were 1099s, right? So like I then started having to pay like quarterly taxes at like an extremely young age, because none of that was covered. You know, nothing was being taken out as an employee. So like stuff like that is where it got really validated in the eyes of my parents, even if they never quite understood, and to this day maybe don't really understand like fully what I do. It's like once the money became involved, it was like, oh, well, I mean, whatever, I guess. Like, however you, everyone's path is different. Yours is online, and this is very early in online. So I think that's what made it even more abstract. Was like, at least these days, even our parents are using online social networks and things like that. They have some sense like, oh yeah, you can have an identity and do things elsewhere. That didn't exist back then, or was very foreign at least.
I'm curious, what was your first moment where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking to or interviewing this person? Like for me, when I started podcasting, I started doing interviews as an offshoot from my music podcast, which doesn't exist anymore. And one of the first people I interviewed was the lead singer of Power Man 5000, Rob Zombie's younger brother, Spider-1. And like, it was over the phone. He was super cool. But to me, that was like, this is a person I listen to all the time. I know that, like, I know who this person is. And now I'm having a casual chat with him. Like, and it blew my mind. And I've been lucky enough to have chats like that tons of times since. I'm curious if there's like a standout interview of like, this was the first like person in games that you're like, I can't believe I'm talking to this person.
Well, it's funny because although games is my career, I don't know that it was sort of by accident. Like, it was kind of happenstance. I sort of stumbled into this. I didn't know I was making a career until I had one. And then when that was a convenient solution to what am I going to do at college? What am I going to do after college? I was like, well, let's just double down on this thing that's worked so far. And so I've always had kind of a distance from games and sort of the games industry figures in that way, because I never really grew up revering them in that sort of sense. And maybe that's an advantage. That said, I've also never quite ascended to the plane of editor where like you get the Miyamoto interview, where maybe that is the one that sort of would get me. It wasn't, I guess. Okay, so I guess the one I can think of being intimidating was Tomonobu Itagaki, the designer on the like Ninja Gaiden revival on the Xbox, and he was famous for being, I guess, infamous for being pretty prickly. And Gaming Age had reviewed Ninja Gaiden and gave it a C-, did not like it. And when I came into the interview, I don't know how old I was. I was like 16. I couldn't have been too much. I had to have been 16. I think 16 is right. It was made clear through the interpreter that they were aware of the interview and or the review and were unhappy about it.
Oh, no.
And I explained that I did not write it and had not played the game yet. And then the interpreter said, Itagaki-san will proceed with the interview, but does not necessarily trust you to pass on his answers to your audience. I'm like,
wow.
Okay. And then proceeded to like get like very non-committal short answers to the I got about 5 minutes in, was like, okay, like I get it, and like just kind of closed my notebook. They tried to offer me a t-shirt, and I distinctly remember punching their booth on the way out, not to like cause damage, but because I was just like frustrated at how the experience had gone. So that is probably I swear I have that tape somewhere. It's probably deteriorated at this point. I really should have digitally archived at some point, but that's the closest I can think of in terms of games, because elsewhere where it's happened was like a Giant Bomb. For a number of years in October, I would do sort of like horror coverage. It would be my excuse to email John Carpenter's son at webmaster@johncarpenter.com and ask if he would answer some questions of mine, which he did a couple of years in a row. Like when I managed to get Eduardo Sanchez, one of the co-directors of the Blair Witch Project, which is probably one of my favorite horror movies of all time, it like managed to have like a 45-minute Skype call with him. Like that made me nervous. Was that. So I think for me, maybe either because of this career being sort of happenstance or because I've done it long enough that kind of stuff doesn't really faze me. It's when I interview figures outside of games is when I find myself sweating a little bit.
That's fair. I want to talk a little bit about Waypoint, and we're going to talk a lot about Waypoint. I want to talk about more specifically the success of Waypoint Plus, which I am a subscriber of.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And the offshoots. Like, obviously, I've been a long-time listener. You guys used to do movie conversations and have offshoot podcasts, and then you kind of had to curtail that, and now you've come back to it. But I really want to focus in on the Patrick Robb experience that is sports, because as someone who grew up, like, I watched the Bulls because it was the Bulls growing up, right? Like, Jordan was
a cultural phenomenon, yeah.
And then became a fan even after he left, for as depressing as that was. And like my father was a Knicks fan, but I mostly only watched basketball like with family. It wasn't until I was in college that like I started watching the New York Giants because friends of mine did, right? And it's like this camaraderie of like, we're just gonna all hang out, we're gonna buy a lot of junk food, and we're just gonna watch the Giants, and we're gonna act big and like talk trash talk. And it was fun, and I did it for so long. And then all those friends either had kids or got married or moved away or whatever, and so you don't get. And my spouse humors and even participates in a ton of stuff that I love that they may not even love, but like sports is where they draw the line.
Video games is where my wife draws the line. She's like, I don't. I'm glad that this pays the bills and how is good for your children, but I don't know what this is, and I have no interest in finding out.
Yeah. And so like when this podcast started, like when I tweeted at you, I meant all of that. Like it felt like I was reunited with those friends because you and Rob don't talk about the Bears like you're not analyzing each player, not getting down to the nitty-gritty of what, like you're just having a chat about sports and most of the time how frustrating, stupid, or ridiculous it is. And Like, did this just evolve out of the natural, like, curtails or post-pod, like, tack-ons where you guys would talk about the latest Bears game? Or is this something that you've always wanted to do and now you just had the opportunity to do it? Like, how did it kind of come to be?
Like the origins of it are at a certain point when we worked with Austin every day, like we didn't need a private DM chain between like me, Rob, and Austin. And then when Austin became a contractor, he was just frequently around us less. And so we started a DM chain on Discord, which, you know, in theory you might be like, I'm sure they're talking high level things about, you know, video games and trading industry gossip and just like I'm sure the rhetorical conversations they're having on Waypoint, like they're just doing this privately. It's like, no, like it's just like sharing like a cool dunk from like a Nets game the night before, and it was really a lot of talk about sports, very very little talk about video games, and so that kind of was one of those early outlets other than my experiences in real life. And then a handful of times we would indulge ourselves on the podcast, mostly because Rob, Austin, and I intersected with this personal interest, and we would allow ourselves to talk about it every once in a great while. The problem is it's like we interestingly found, so one of the founding principles of Waypoint was born out of Austin and I's sort of like co-experiences at Giant Bomb, was, you know, something I certainly didn't plan to do, just sort of like stumbled into, was sort of a personal political awakening, and then wanting to talk about my own experiences with that and like integrating that with my reporting. And got a like substantial pushback from elements of the Giant Bomb audience of like, isn't this website supposed to be fun? And that was frequently frustrating because I was like, well, there's plenty of fun here. Like can't we also do this? I'm dressing up in a hot dog costume. I can do the fun part. And then when I left and Austin like took my role out in the New York office, Austin ran into similar things. And I remember when I asked to have dinner with him after he got hired at PAX, the first PAX he had gone out to not long after he joined Giant Bomb. And I swear this is all going somewhere. And I was like, hey, let me just lay out like this weird website and the community. I was like, I had an experience that I think is going to be kind of like yours. And I just, you know, would like to prep you at all in any way I can. And we came out of that dinner going, well, it sucks. Like this would have been we really align on a lot of things. It'd be fun to work together. And of course that ended up, you know, turning into to Vice Games and then into Waypoint. But again, like one of those founding principles was like, well, let's start a website that from the jump says you're here because we're going to integrate politics into video games, like, and culture into video games. And if that doesn't interest you, that's cool. But that's what we're going to do. So don't give a shit for framing video games and discussions in that way. And that is all the preamble to the discovery that, well, when we talked about sports, we would frequently get feedback that said, hey, I'm here for you guys to talk about like how does leftism and like and progressive thought intersect with like this new BioShock game, not like look at this sick pass the Eagles threw last night. And so it was like a really funny full circle.
Right.
And so, you know, we kind of ended up kind of squashing that, especially once Austin left. And it was like, Rob and Patrick are not just going to sit here and talk about sports while Kato and then eventually Ren just sort of sit there and kind of twiddle their fingers. And so when Waypoint Plus comes along, I had threatened to Rob in the first year. I was like, man, we should do like a sports thing. But we were like, it took us almost a full year to kind of get our feet under us in terms of what is Waypoint, like how much are we writing, how much are we, like it just took a while to sort of figure out. And especially then we went through a long, lengthy process to hire Ren. And at a certain point we felt, my thought was, well, the audience, let's just see what they're willing to take. And I was like, Rob, like you and I are doing this in our DMs all the time after work. Like all we're doing is just like talking about sports, talking about the Bears. Let's just do it. Like, let's do something completely indulgent. We'll see if we have fun doing it. And then we'll also see what the reaction from the audience is. And I remember when I asked for questions for the first episode of the sports podcast, it was the most amount of questions I had gotten for any specific, like it was in the hundreds.
Wow.
And, the response we got, we like saw like a, kind of a, uptick in the sub numbers a little bit, which is probably people who maybe drifted away and like thought this sounded interesting. But generally, the entire reaction was extremely positive. And I still don't. I should ask. We should do this. Maybe I should do this on the next podcast. It's like, why are you listening? Mostly because it's like, are these non-sports listeners that just want to hear Rob and I like get progressively buzzed and yell at each other about terms the listener doesn't understand? But I also think that there are a lot of people that like sports that also like video games, and I think what we've identified is that they're like the Venn diagram there is bigger even amongst our small audience, small relative to, bigger audiences like a Kind of Funny or something like that. And they've been very receptive to it, and they keep listening, and they've enabled us. It has caused confused reactions within the company I work for of why are we producing? Didn't we shut down? Didn't we lay those people off that work in sports years ago? I don't know. They click and play. So that's like the long story of like where we arrive at this. I think the 5th episode just went up a couple hours ago, in which we, we opened the podcast with the Bears back, and we said they weren't. And then now 5 episodes in, we have declared that the Bears are in fact back, which is an exciting development for the Bears and our podcast.
Yeah. I mean, well, what's fun about it is I found that depending on the hosts and the shows, like you get excited about what they're excited about. Right. And like, right. I'm a Giants fan, unfortunately. I became a Giants fan.
This is an exciting year for the Giants. You got the coach I actually wanted. Like, I wanted Brian Daboll to, like, hey, Justin Fields reminds me of Josh Allen in some ways. Like, come here. And then, unfortunately, he was a package deal with that GM. It was never going to happen. So I've been, as our team was kind of struggling early, I was like, God damn it. Like, the team I wanted our team to be was what the Giants are being, which is that we don't have any talent. We don't even like our quarterback, but we'll just be really chaotic on the field every week. And maybe we can eke out some surprising wins, which is what's happened so far.
Well, yeah, I mean, with the Giants, though, it's like been up and down for so long that it's like, yeah, well, it's another year. Mm-hmm. But like, for me, what was hard was when I became a diehard Giants fan, it was of the era of Ahmed Bradshaw and like Eli was at his peak. Mm-hmm. And then I finally, after like a year of debating, was like, I'm going to buy an Ahmed Bradshaw jersey. I like this player. I really love he tests ridiculous plays.
This is a great way to curse yourself.
I absolutely did, because I bought, and I've wanted to tell this story on sports, and I may still submit it later, but like, so I bought the jersey, and like within weeks he breaks 1 foot and he's out for a while. And like, I don't remember the exact timing, but like, I believe he broke 1 foot and then eventually went back, still played, and then maybe broke the other foot or something like that. Like literally, and then maybe eked out another 6 months. And then, as these players do after they get severe injuries like that, when they're supposed to be running all the time, he was gone. Like, he either got traded, I believe he got traded elsewhere. And I was like, and then I look at this jersey, which I still have, and I'm like, well, now what am I going to do with this? I cursed my player, and now he's gone. And
I know. So, I've been thinking about buying a Justin Fields jersey. I bought a Mitch Trubisky one when the day he got he was cut from the team. Yeah. Because everywhere just started doing a fire sale on Trubisky stuff. So I bought like a poster of him. Like, everything was like 80% off, and I was like, now's the time to get my Trubisky jersey, because in my garage I have a haul of Bears quarterbacks where every time they get a new one, starting with Trubisky, I haven't figured out how I do want to do all of them at some point, but I can't fit the big ones. But I'm going to get a big poster of like the last every 5 years. Like, so I still need to get Andy Dalton one and Nick Foles one. Like, and I just want to be adorned with the tragedy, and hopefully I can just stop at Justin Fields, and then I don't have to update that for 10 years. But knowing the Bears history, that will not be the case.
I want to shift gears and talk about your writing a little bit, and talk about how, for me, as a creator and someone who's admired your work for a long time, what I like about your writing is either I always understand where you're coming from. So even if I don't agree with you, which I find is actually kind of often with AAA stuff, I understand why you feel the way about a certain game, and I still enjoy your writing. But your indie writing has been some of my favorite, because every time you've said, play this game, and I've played it, I've been thankful for it. And the article I think of the most is I believe it was in 2019, you wrote an article about a short hike. And I had never heard of it. And life sims, like you, like I'm like I'll play them for like 8 hours, and then I'll burn out and be like, I don't want to do chores anymore. I'm done.
Right.
And so like when you said this is like, I think on one of the episodes of Waypoint, you said it's like Animal Crossing, except like it's short and there's like a path. Like you're not just doing stuff. I was like, all right, you know what? I'm going to pick up this game and play it. And it was the best 2 or 3 hours. Like,
the game rules.
I just loved it. To the point where, talking about my spouse before, my spouse will play games with me and likes video games, but much more likes narrative or like walking sims. I recommended A Short Hike, and they loved it as well because it was just do the thing. You're rewarded for your curiosity. Do you find when writing about games that it's easier to write about those gems than it is the AAA or like the things that have this weight and expectation? Do you have a preference, or is it just kind of like it's wherever your attention goes?
Yeah, there's also sort of like less weight associated with, writing some of the smaller stuff. You sort of know it's not going to do traffic. You sort of know that you're kind of just writing it to champion something that you hope other people get to spend some time with. I mean, frankly, that is the stuff I struggle with the most to write as a writer. That was only made more acute when I came to Giant Bomb. And it's like, look at this, like, amazing piece of writing that Austin did. Like, go fuck yourself. Like, that makes me feel awful. Like, I was like, I'm never going to do. And it's like, oh, and then we hired Rob. It's like, oh, great. Like, here's another, like, really smart mind that, like, just pulls words out of their ass that sound really smart. And I'm just, and it's fine. Like, I also, I could run circles around them as a reporter. And it's like, right. It's okay. Like, I've accepted my lot in life rhetorically. But I get, like, in some version, one answer to this is like I actually just don't really like doing stuff like that. But it's often a challenge where you just want to you're trying to find angles into how do I champion the stuff that I like, and sometimes that is an article, sometimes that's a podcast, sometimes that's a stream. That is out of my experience at Giant Bomb, in which sort of like you're sort of colliding your personality and your personal voice with the work that you're doing. That is sort of like the guiding light on any of that. So, whether it's like writing a review of like the God of War, a revival from 2018, in which it's like, I'm sorry, like I'm a dad, like I'm a mark for these games. Like it's got bad things to say about women, but like the sad dad stuff makes me sad too. Sorry. And so I think like the best thing you can do when you write those pieces is like just to put yourself out there in that framing, so that hopefully people arrive at how you're responding to it, of okay, like this isn't how I think I'm gonna respond to this, or how you did respond to it, but I understand how Patrick arrived at that. And that was a lot of what we tried to do at Waypoint generally, was the names, like the bylines are really important, like they mean something, and like that personal framing should allow you to at least understand that viewpoint, even if you don't follow the same like path and conclusion as the person who wrote it.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's what I love about Waypoint as a whole, is like I feel like I know all of you because of how personal you all get on the show and how personal your writing is, to the point where when Marvel Snap came out and I played it, and like this identical experience you talked about on the show, like I played it, went, I don't know if I'll like this, and then 8 games later I'm like, oh no, like, I'm gonna play this. But my second thought was, oh man, Kato is going to eat this alive, because, yes. And like, I love that kind of relatability. It's funny, I don't listen to a ton of video game podcasts anymore. I used to listen to a lot of them.
I don't listen to a single one, like not a zip.
Like, and I feel like that's kind of the MO, right? Like because I have a gaming podcast, I just don't listen to as many of them, but I keep coming back to Waypoint because of the personal experiences. Like where else am I going to get a story where someone that I deeply respect and also love to laugh at destroys his own glass top stove without thinking?
Oh my God.
And like as like those kinds of moments are so human. Or like someone I've wanted to talk about the whole show, one of my favorite new members of your family, the incredible Jackson Bones, named by your incredible daughter. For those who don't know, Patrick bought one of those giant house-sized skeletons that you always see at Home Depot, that everyone sees at Home Depot. And I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in New York that I own and that I love, but will never own a Jackson Bones of my own while here. And so I've lived vicariously through you. And so the first thing I want to know is, how is Jackson doing now that the Halloween season, the season he was brought home for, is over, and what his plans are for Thanksgiving and Christmas? Do you have like a outfitting plan? Have your neighbors quite understood, like, oh man, it's like 2 weeks since Halloween?
I mean, Jackson went up in late August, so I feel like people
they understand.
Well, when I bought it, it's like, what am I gonna do? Like, not put this up? Like,
Right.
They sold it to me. It's Halloween. That's the definition I'm going by. If you can put up Christmas stuff in mid-October, I can put a skeleton up in at the end of August. Also, I don't have an HOA, so like nobody can tell me what to do. That's one of the more common things you see amongst the 12-foot skeleton enthusiasts. Is that in like some of the Facebook groups where people will post like, here's how I dressed it, and here are the links to the things I bought if you want to do something similar. Like right around mid to end of September, it's a bunch of people just like yelling about their HOA because they've gotten a specific letter that's like, we know you have the skeleton, don't put that shit up until like October 1st. And then you have people putting it up on September 30th being like, I'm breaking the law, this skeleton's going up. And so I was very intrigued by the like having the skeleton up, if not year long, then a significant chunk of the year, because it makes me laugh.
Yeah.
And I think it's deeply funny. So currently Jackson Bones has 2 of their arms taken off because about a week ago, everything's fine. About a week ago, we had like 50-mile-per-hour winds come through when I was out of town. And my neighbor was like, hey, is that skeleton going to be okay? And I called my wife, and she's like, he's swaying, man. Like, that thing is, okay, well, so my neighbor came over. He's very handy, helped her put some more stakes down into it. And then also he had done some research because he also bought one of these skeletons after I bought one. So we could they could wave at each other down the street. He had noticed in one of the Facebook groups that people were like, if you just take the arms off, it'll sway less, because like the arms are like kind of like would contribute to it going back and forth. So anyway, like I need to do like the final mow of the fall before we actually get to cold weather in the next week or two, and then I need to figure out what I'm doing. I haven't decided if I want to do anything for Thanksgiving, because like it comes and goes so quickly, and then just transitions to Christmas right away. And I think I'd rather take the budget of whatever I'd buy for Thanksgiving and just put it straight into Christmas. My youngest got very into Nightmare Before Christmas throughout October, and so my thought was, well, we'll turn Jackson Bones into Jack Skellington. So all that requires is a big Santa suit, in which I believe it's if you buy XXXL. Broadly speaking, those will fit on the skeleton. I think is the sort of rule of thumb when it comes to buying, clothing and gear for the creature. And then I need to buy go spend $100 on blow ups and things that can like kind of set the stage for that. So I think it's also a long-term process. It's like, I spent $300 on the skeleton. I spent like another $150 on like kind of accessories around it. And then it was like, okay, like I'm approaching $500. There will be another Halloween, and then I can get more stuff, but it's sort of a long-term investment plan in terms of what is the year-round cycle. But we've thought, they're like, okay, stay up through December, then I'll probably take them down. Maybe you just might go in the backyard. Like there's a spot in our backyard where you kind of like hide in the trees. That would be funny.
Amazing.
And it'll stay back there until March. Then we'll do St. Patrick's Day, Easter. Then he'll probably come down, and then might go for July 4th, and at that point, maybe you're just up through December again.
I mean, July is practically August, which is practically October.
Exactly. You understand 100% where I'm going with this.
I get it.
And so I think that might be where we go with it. That's the tentative plan, details subject to change.
I love that. I just, like I said, as someone who grew up in a house in Staten Island and always wanted something like that, but they just didn't exist. And now, like, living in an apartment where we're not even allowed to put stuff on our door in our building, which is, and so Halloween is, I mean, also, like, during the pandemic, to make a very long story short, we had a roof fire in this apartment. I was displaced for 21 months.
No.
The whole 3 lines in the building all got water damage and destroyed practically. Most of our stuff survived, but, like, the kitchen and bathroom gone. And so, like, the last couple of Halloweens, we've been in that temporary apartment we were renting, and so I didn't really think about Halloween. But we got a puppy over the summer. And my spouse is an actress and a podcaster and an incredible human who doesn't love Halloween because, like, to them, dressing up is like the Ren Fair or like acting like. And I've always loved Halloween. I love cosplay. Like, I like dressing up. I love costumes. But this year said to me, so what are we going to get for our dog? We have to dress up our dog. And I was like, yes, I'm in. This is it. Through the dog, we're going to start celebrating Halloween more. As we planned this year, but like we can't put anything on the doors. We can put stuff in the window, but we face like the back of the building, so like no one will see it. Like we put our menorah in the window for the holidays, but like it's for
just
us,
for you
mostly, yeah. And so, like I said, I'm not kidding when I say I'm living vicariously through you, because the idea of having one of those giant skeletons is just like, this is the perfect way to celebrate Halloween. And so I'm excited with your plan. I can't wait to see the progress as it develops. Has the family figured out that this was more for you than for anyone else yet?
No, this is, if my wife, she doesn't give a shit about video games, but she, we initially bonded over horror films.
Right.
That is something that we shared a mutual appreciation for when we first started dating. That's like something that we'd always use as an excuse to spend more time together when we first met. And so like Halloween is like a big deal holiday for us, and we have done our best to indoctrinate our children into the festivities as well. And so it was like a no-brainer. Like when I called my wife to tell her I'd found it, she's like, "Oh, thank God, finally!" So yeah, there
perfect.
Didn't have
True
to
love.
be.
True love.
Did not have to be sold on it at all. We were good to go on that front. And the kids were a little standoffish the first time it was up because it was a giant skeleton in the yard, which is understandable. But they eventually they came around it pretty quickly, especially when we started naming it. And I remember when we first got it, my youngest, who is 2.5, you can see the head of the skeleton just outside of one of the couches upstairs, and she's like, "Is Jackson okay?" Like, "I'm gonna check." And like she climb up on the couch, like look over, and like he's okay. When she wake up in the morning, but Jackson can't come inside, he's too big. Like, I hope he's okay. Climb up on the couch,
adorable.
Like go check. And so yeah, the kids have enjoyed it quite a bit, which just reinforces that it was the right decision to make. I didn't do this for me. I did it for my
family. Of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. I want to shift gears and talk about the future of Waypoint. The show's been around forever, it feels like, for me, because I've just been a fan. It's gone through so many evolutions. Ren, like, whenever anyone new is joining your favorite thing, you're like, I don't know, Ren seems cool, but like, and then like I think the first episode, she starts making fun of Rob, and I'm like, oh, we're good. We're golden. We're done.
Well, it's one of my requirements for any new hire.
People have to make fun of Rob.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good to know. But like, I'm curious where you see now with Waypoint Plus and everything else, where it's going. You've got a great movie podcast, My Turn, where people are picking movies, and then you're even letting the audience pick a movie based on your choices. You've got sports. You've done interviews. You have man-hunting. Like, do you see it continuing to grow? And you're doing streams regularly. Do you see this growth continuing as Waypoint Plus grows? Or have you guys kind of hit like a stride and you want to see where this goes before adding more and more stuff?
Yeah, I think we're in a really good stride. I mean, it's hard. There are avenues where we can do new things. Like I've been excited to, with the horribly titled Daddy's Day Off, which people interpreted as I had the day off and I was spending it like streaming to my work account. And I was like, no, it's just a dumb name. I'm definitely getting paid. These are just what I can't do because of the fact that I am a father of 2. And so I, conceived of that as an excuse to finish like the last 60 hours of Elden Ring that I was otherwise never going to play. And now I've brought that back as a regular feature for like, and I'm working my way through Cyberpunk 2077. And so like those are examples of like things we're experimenting with and trying to find sort of new formats. Like, it's really hard for me to imagine like any sort of like massive expansion in terms of what we're doing. I think what I can imagine going forward is like, how do we create, other new shows and things that are, so rather than doing more, it's doing different, right? So it's, now like, for Waypoint Plus subscribers, you're getting a varied amount of either the sports show, or if you don't like that, well, then My Turn might be the week after, or if you don't like that, then there's manhunting, and like trying to create a diversity of just different like show concepts. And like that is my goal for a lot of next year, is to pilot and roll out things that are like that, so that we're giving people kind of different flavors of things they can listen to and watch, rather than necessarily, I mean, if I could wave a magic wand, then I'd love to have more people, because also as a result of a lot of this expansion, I've had way less time to do writing and reporting. And, that's the nature of kind of what we built, and careers ebb and flow in that way. And you lean into what pays the bills. But I that's what sort of what I expect from, if the first year-ish of Waypoint Plus was like, okay, what do we do? Clearly people bought this, but I think they were just being nice. And then as we go through, we're about halfway through that second year. It's like, okay, how do we really make good on this? How do we use the fact that folks have given us this financial kind of lifeline to be more experimental? And it's like, okay, well, if they like sports, then what else can we branch off into that we find interesting, and it maybe stretches the original definition of what Waypoint was, but that Waypoint Plus sort of opens up a broader spectrum of kind of discussion topics. And so I'm curious to see where that lands in the future.
I mean, it's been fun to watch. I mean, like I said, I used to watch your Mario Maker streams and stuff, and to see you bring some of that chaos over into Waypoint has been so rewarding. I remember when you and Kato were streaming, what was the game by FromSoft that you were playing in anticipation of Elden Ring?
King's Field 4, which I do want to get back to at some point. Maybe I've promised Kato I will play a shitload of Destiny, so I'm booked up through, I think, February. But yes, I would love an excuse to get back to King's Field.
But that stream specifically, I remember watching the VODs and being like, this is just chaos. And part of that is also the game and the age of the game, and how you're interacting with it on your special PlayStation and all of that. But
very special PlayStation.
Very special. But I think what makes Waypoint special is that none of you really stop anyone from putting themselves into it and really kind of leaning into the absurdity, personality. And I think that comes from wanting to be more political, wanting to, factor real life into video games, which so many people are like, keep your life out of my video games, which is just the thing I hate the most about playing video games, is that nonsense. Waypoint really doesn't seem to care for that kind of garbage. You guys really do seem like you want to be personable and educational and understanding and grow and help your audience grow, which sounds like was the mission statement from the beginning, but has only grown since.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And the fact that we've had, folks reach out and, express as such to kind of validate the original thought on could this be interesting is really cool and really validating as, as someone that's a writer and editor, but also just as a human being. The fact that people care that much about what we have to say and the ways we frame it is super cool. And this version of Waypoint is not something we would have anticipated when it all started, but I think it's very cool that we've been able to, through the ebbs and flows of being in a company where, executives come and go, directives, goals come and go, much like it was weird when Giant Bomb got bought by CBS. There are, of course, there's a bit of strangeness in being part of a company and doing the subscription the way that we're doing. But, broadly, they sort of leave us alone and allow us to sort of continue this mission. And I'm very thankful for that, given how tumultuous, not just sort of, my environment of the kind of work that I do, but just, things are weird in general. And it's nice that I'm going to talk about White House Down and get paid for it. I can't tell my neighbors about this. How would you even explain it? My wife she's like, why are you watching Predator? It's 11 in the morning. I'm like, she's like, you're doing a podcast on Predator. I was like, oh no, my wife's making fun of me for what I do for a living. Fair, good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that you kind of don't know where it's going until it gets there a little bit. And I think part of that is just the nature of this industry. I mean, unfortunately, there have been an insane amount of layoffs and closings and ruptures in games journalism, especially this year. And so it must be nice to know that the specific people you are trying to reach are investing in your future, a thing that a lot of these other places didn't have that luxury, right? For one reason or another, it wasn't the people who on the ground doing the work who wanted that, who saw or understood why that was ending. And so it must be nice to at least know you're reaching the people that you care about reaching, and that they are financially investing back in your future personally.
Yeah, I mean, there were earlier versions of Waypoint where we tried to pitch the company on, let's try a Giant Bomb style direct to,
right.
You call it direct to consumer. DTC is the internal lingo that you'd use to get an executive to ooh, I've heard, I was at a thing where they said DTC, and it was just really difficult to to pull off. Like, companies always want to build their own infrastructure, and it was just a lot of feet dragging over something that, when you would see how our save point streams would go, every time we asked the audience to show up, they did.
Yeah.
And we're like, we're pretty sure that would extend to a platform that like unlocked us moving away from like the typical traffic models and things like that allowed us to kind of double down on the audience unlocking what we're already doing. And we just got very fortunate that, the folks at Motherboard, when like the bigger version of Waypoint kind of got folded into the tech side over at Vice, we couldn't have fallen under better like guidance and hands, like folks who helped us through that transition and were incredibly kind as we tried to figure out how we fit in. And so we kind of muddled our way through for a period there. And then, Motherboard launched a paid newsletter just on a whim, or it was like a physical thing that people could get like a physical newsletter. So they set that all up and on a whim kind of like got all of that integrated into Vice as a company. And then at some point we're like, haven't you guys always talked about doing like a paid thing? Like, let's just figure out what it is and like pull the trigger. And so we kind of just did it. And I mean, the company became aware of like the product very close to launch, but essentially we just sort of got it together and I said, let's just see what happens. And as always, we had private expectations for the numbers and they blew past them in a way that, frankly, it would have been better if less people bought it early, because what the company wants to see is like, well, what are we doing next? Yeah. And it was like, so like if the number was like, if what we wanted was like, it was slightly higher than we expected. And then like, instead we just went like a hockey stick up and was like, and is, done well since, but like, we went too high too fast in the best way possible. I mean that in the most complimentary way to the audience. It just makes it complicated to explain sometimes internally.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and that makes sense, right? Like you want to show slow growth, you want to show evolution, and instead you're like, here we are.
The audience like, no, we wanted to do this for years. Oh, thank you. Like, we appreciate all you do. And it's like, shit. Like we should have told them to do it in waves. But it's fine. It's fine. Those are good problems to have.
For sure. I'm curious now, as a video game enthusiast who loves to play games and loves to write about games, do you have like games that you will always put to the side? Like my favorite example is like kind of like Spelunky 2 and how ultimately you thought was okay, but was nothing compared to Spelunky 1. Do you find you have more moments like that where the games you were looking forward to end up being part of the content machine and don't really add up? Or is it like case by case? Like, I know for me, especially in this time of year, it's like, well, I could try and play everything, or I could pick the 2 or 3 things I really want to play and, like, let everything else fall over because you can't play everything.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everything I play is framed by how will that get incorporated to what we do at Waypoint. Right. It is exceptionally rare that I am playing things purely for my own entertainment. Yeah. And even then, when there are games that I want to play for entertainment that I don't have time for, I turn it into content so that it can be entertainment to the audience. And then I, play Elden Ring or Cyberpunk 2077. And, I don't, again, I try to pick games that I think will be interesting or they're big and they would want to know our opinion on it. But like broadly speaking, I play games that are eventually going to be talked about or written about or streamed. And so that is sort of the nature of my job. And also, frankly, because I just have limited time, right? Like I don't have enough time usually to play things that I just want to play or replay old things or play a number of exceptionally long games because, I put my kids to sleep between 8 and 9 o'clock. I like watch an episode of a thing with my wife. And then from 10 to midnight, I can dedicate to playing a game. And frequently, like if you start parsing out the hours, and I don't really play games on Friday or Saturday, because that's usually when I watch movies with my wife or stay up later with the neighbors and drinking and stuff like that. So it's like, all of a sudden you've got like 6 to 8 hours that like if I'm gonna have some substantive stuff to talk about on the podcast, that's where most of the time gets dedicated to.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I mean, for me, I mostly do the same, or I find like if there's a game that I don't Like, for example, right now I'm playing Sonic Frontiers, and I'm a big Sonic fan, and I've been loving it. But instead of just playing it, I'm tweeting through it, right? I'm sharing my thoughts. I'm sharing my impressions. I'm sharing screenshots. I think of course, there's a gratification to it. You want to engage with your friends and your audience and whoever else. But, like, I think there comes a time where certain forms of media, you just accept this is when and how I can play them, and that's it. It sounds like, though, for the most part, like horror movies and TV shows and other things like that, you are able to keep more personal. I mean, as now you're doing movie podcasts about movies and podcasts about sports, it feels like all of your interests are just being tied into Waypoint at this point.
Yeah, although like to the frustration of Rob and others, like I remember when they wanted to do a podcast on Severance, and like, well, could we? And I was like, oh, well, I've watched like half it with my wife. And like, okay, well, could you just like catch up on the rest so we could do it next week and just like watch it during a work day? And I was like, no, like I watched these with my wife, and so if all of you want to record the podcast without me, that's fine. I can live with that. But like, no, this is the pact I have with my wife. And even there, like, you know, over the years, her and I have done, which I've lovingly now retroactively called 2 seasons of Till Death Do Us Part, which is where we talk about horror movies into a microphone.
Right.
We called those 2 seasons because when you took 2 years off in between doing episodes, if you call them seasons, it sounds like an event.
Right.
So in the Twitter bio for it, I finally just called them seasons, and was like, you know, we wanted to do them this year, but we didn't. And you know, maybe we'll do them in the future, and then season 3 of Till Death Do Us Part. But even that is, I like the fact that not many people listen to it. It's an opportunity to do a conversation, like a forced conversation about something with my wife, in which we talk about some things differently than what you do when, you know, like you finish watching it and it's 11:30 and it's like, what'd you think about that? And you go, blah, 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 and like you're done in 5 minutes, and then you move on with your life, as opposed to, hey, let's talk about this for 30 minutes and have some conversation topics. And I really enjoyed that. Unfortunately, it's just difficult to fit in, but maybe one day season 3 will come along.
I hope so. I really loved the first 2 seasons, so I'm hoping that y'all will do more of it. Before I wrap up, something I've been asking a lot of folks during the pandemic, which is unfortunately still ongoing, though most people don't think it is. I just got over COVID, so it's still here. But I've been asking folks, like, was there a clear silver lining during this time as we work through this? Something that maybe I know you work from home, so while a lot of folks were like home more, you already got to see your family plenty because you work from home. Like, I'm curious if there was like a clear silver lining during that time. Like, it was horrible and a lot of terrible things happened, but something good that came out of that time, being home more, not being able to go out, you know, if there was anything good that came out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that happened was the kids that were home had to be outside if they wanted to play. And so, you know, the block that we're on, we knew there were other kids there, but they were a little older than ours. And so we never quite crossed paths with them. And one day we came home from getting something at the store, and it had snowed a bunch. This was the winter. And just, there were like 7 kids building a snow fort in our yard. It's like, what is going on here? And so we quickly got out, and Jessica was like, can I play with those kids? I'm like, well, they're in our yard, so yes, you can play with them. And after all that, those, you know, 2 of those older kids came back and were like, could Jessica play again? And, you know, on one hand, I was like, that's really cool. On the other hand, I can't tell if these kids actually want to play with her, or she's just like a new, like, it's COVID, like they can't go anywhere else. And like, oh, look, there's someone else that we can play with. And those turned out to be like extremely good friends. Like, we've since become like extremely good friends with many of the parents, who I now consider to be like close personal friends, and not just like the parents of kids that are on the block. And, you know, that probably never would have happened, or not to the degree that it has, without COVID sort of forcing everyone out and just trying to make it work with the people that are around you. And like, it's like transformed like our personal relationships in a way that I'm like extremely grateful for. So that is something that I'm very grateful happened because of COVID.
It's funny, that story reminds me of how you often talk about how it's kind of a relief for you that most of your friends locally don't really, either if they play video games, it's like that one big video game a year. Like, they're not tapped into games journalism and know what you do but don't really like want to talk about that. They want to talk about other things. And I think it's just funny when you tell those stories, because I like doing podcasts. I host 4 different podcasts. I produce more, and like I'm a freelance editor for Game Informer. Like I do too much. But when I talk to my friends that are not people I've met online or people in the industry, they're all like, "Oh, that's nice. That must be nice." Like, or then I occasionally get to tell them like, I got a code for Shredder's Revenge to review, and I talked to the developers, and that was a big deal for me because I love Turtles. I love that team. Like, and they're like, "Oh, that's cool," and then that's it. They're done. And it's like, and at first it was frustrating because I'm like, I'm proud of all this work I'm doing. I want to talk to people about it now because I'm so online and so plugged in, and most of the people I talk to regularly are folks who are other games journalists or work in the industry, that when I meet those people are like, "Oh, so you want to talk about movies or music?" I'm like, "Yes, please." Yes. Literally anything else besides video games, because podcasting and video games is all I talk about. So thank you. And I think that's kind of freeing as an adult, that when I was a younger creator, I was like, "Oh, this is frustrating." And now I'm like, "Oh, this is great."
Yeah. Well, it's the same reason I don't listen to video game podcasts. It's like nothing, I don't talk to Vinny Caravello enough, and I'd probably know more about his life if I listened to the Next Lander podcast, but I just cannot be bothered. And I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I use that. So much of my time is spent thinking about video games, talking about video games, interacting with video games, that I try to use that bandwidth, that mental bandwidth, to like think about other things and learn about other things. And so yeah, I'm in the same, as you mentioned, the same boat of, I'm happy to talk about it. It's not like I avoid it.
Yeah.
I'm just never going to be the one that brings it up.
Right. I'm curious though. So you're one of my favorite writers and journalists. I've been reading your work for a long time. Some of your mutuals are some of my favorites too, like Rebecca Valentine and Moises Tavares. I'm curious if you have, as a person who is in that industry and in that space, especially doing the heavy reporting and writing, do you have favorites that you turn to, people that you're like, I can trust their opinion even if I don't always agree with it? Do you have people that like you always read or check out, whether it's in games or even outside of games?
Yeah, it's weird because now it's like most of those people are like my colleagues, and so I like don't even really think of them in that
right.
in that context. But I mean, like, someone like Rebecca Valentine is like absolutely one of those people. It's like I will click on any features she does. Like I think I've told this story before on Waypoint Radio, but I think in the way that people think about folks like myself and how I'm like sort of a conduit for like, whatever they think about a game, that's probably going to be reflective of my own personal opinion. Like I found that in this movie critic, mostly TV critic, Alan Sepinwall, who now writes for Rolling Stone, in which basically across the board, like they just communicate my ideas and thoughts and reflections. And so like whenever they drop a review of something, it's like, I get to find out what I think of this before I've watched it. This is delightful. And so that is like the closest analog I have is like anything Alan writes. I'm like, okay, like if they like it, I'm probably gonna like it. And so that's kind of where I fall on that.
Patrick, thank you for being so generous with your time. I've wanted to have you on the show for a long time. I really appreciate you chatting with me. Can you tell folks where they can find you online if they're not familiar with your work, where they can find Waypoint, the best way to get to Waypoint Plus, all of that good stuff? Plug where they can find you and all your incredible work.
Yeah, you can follow me personally. Not figuring out how Mastodon works, but if you want to stay on the Hell site, you can follow me at Patrick Klepek. The writing, when we do get time, ends up at waypoint.vice.com. You can hear me most often on Waypoint Radio, which is twice a week. And all of our Plus material, which these days now usually just comes out earlier on the Waypoint Plus feed and then filters down to the main feed either a couple days or a week later. If you want to support what we're up to over at Waypoint, you can sign up at waypointplus.com, which these days, gets you the sports podcast, the movie podcast, My Turn, Manhunting, and hopefully many more things in the future. You get that a little earlier and without ads if you sign up for Waypoint Plus. And you also allow us to tell Vice that, yes, we should be allowed to do a sports podcast. Like, there's nothing weird about that. It's fine. And especially focus just on the Chicago Bears, not really focus on much else. It's fine. It's a very broad category that we're publishing to.
It is. I mean, you also now are taking actual voicemails and stories from people, like that soccer story in, like, I think episode 2, that was like that injury story that was like, ugh, like, it's heartbreaking.
Well,
like,
the hope is when the NFL season is over, my thought on how that podcast evolves is that we would start adopting different sports and just get really into them And it's like, all right, we're doing rugby. All right, we're doing cricket. And then just get cricket pilled for, a month. And that would be a way of like being able to bring on like different guests and like get into different things as we hype ourselves for who the Bears are going to draft in the first round. And so, we'll see. But I've got a lot of ideas for how things like that can evolve in the future.
I mean, you both mentioned Welcome to Wrexham casually, I think, on one of the episodes.
Well, Rob's watched all. Rob, like, yeah, I think this came up on the episode that just came out. But I thought we were gonna watch that together, and then he watched one episode, and his partner looked over and was like, "That looks amazing. Can we just spend the next 2 days watching that?" And then they did, and Rob said it's great. So it is on my list, but unfortunately, I think we missed the opportunity for Rob and I to line it up as content. But we'll find other things.
Well, I highly recommend it. I'm about halfway through it and I've been wrapped. So
excellent.
I think it makes me like, do I like soccer now? Is always the thing. Like, you watch Ted Lasso, you watch a documentary like this. Like, do I like this sport now? Do I want?
The answer is usually no, but that's the that's the fun of watching that stuff. Is then you watch a real game and it's like, oh, okay, I'm good. I like the dramatization. It turns out.
For sure. To close out the show, we have a saying on the podcast, which comes from my now on indefinite hiatus music podcast, much like your horror podcast. Like, it's probably been off longer than it was on at this point, but still hope springs eternal if me and my co-hosts ever get back together. But the phrase is music is life and life is good. It's this idea that when you're creating, even when shit gets hard, tough, tiring, like, you can pour your heart into your art. So if you could say music is life and life is good, we'll close out the show.
Music is life and life is good.
That's it for this episode of CPOV Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great way to help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email mr.matt.storm@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at CPOV Autographs. Thank you so much for listening.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds,
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun, whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there. So we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.